Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to an Economist debate on Africa's young population, opportunity or risk. Before opening the proceedings, I'd like to thank Stanbic and Deloitte, our main sponsors, for what I'm sure will be a stimulating event. And also, I'd like to thank Safaricom for sponsoring the dinner, which some of us may already be looking forward to. We're particularly honored to have His Excellency Raila Odinga, the Prime Minister of Kenya. We are still hoping that shortly His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the Finance Minister, will come, and we have an array of other distinguished ministers, Henry Koski, Sally Koski, Charity Gilu, and Amos Kimunya. I would also like to present and give special thanks to three distinguished panelists, John Githongo, the CEO of Inuka Kenya Trust, and of course much better known to all of you here, I think, for his valiant efforts over many years against corruption. We also have Nick Nesbitt, the CEO of KenCall, and Elke Vish, who's the Deputy Regional Director for UNICEF in East and Southern Africa, responsible, she tells me, for 20 countries. And they will all, I know, contribute handsomely to our discussion. Now to get down to business, the question, opportunity or risk. I'm going to be brief because it's our Kenyan leaders that I know you really want to hear. And I'm going to ask questions, and I'm sorry to say I'm not going to give the answers, and I'm going to stick mainly, not entirely, but mainly to Kenya. Just to remind you, you hardly need reminding, I know, but Kenya's population has exploded. At the end of the 19th century, only 4 or 5 generations ago, the census that we recently had in Kenya says that the population was then 2.4 million. Actually, I think nobody knows. I did once have to look into it. I've seen figures as low as 1 million at the turn of the century when the colonials were starting to arrive. The population then shot up. I won't go sort of decade by decade, but 1948, there were 5.5 million Kenyans. Jump across to 1962, quite soon before independence, we were up to 8.6 million, 1989, 21.4 million, and then up and up, even with the scourge of HIV/AIDS, to today's figure, recently published, of 38.6 million, let's call it 40 million. I think it's worth also noting, some people think this is frightening, others think it's hopeful. That's the point of the discussion. 43% of Kenyans are under 15, 64% are under 25, 75%, John Githongo told me earlier this morning, are under 35. Kenya's well up in the fertility league in Africa, but many other countries are there too. So, is this a terrifying fact or a cause for hope? There is a hopeful scenario. It goes roughly like this. Africa's people are its best asset, and I think that is true. Kenya and much of Africa has an opportunity to take off in economic and other ways, provided, and these are big provisos, that in the next 10 years or so, its fast-growing population is well educated, that a green revolution takes hold, letting this burgeoning population feed itself, that the infrastructure vastly improves, maybe with Chinese help, that urban plans take real shape, that the mobile phone revolution continues to give its present huge and entirely positive impetus to young entrepreneurs and peasant farmers alike, that politics is stable, that governance becomes much cleaner. I should say also that deforestation is halted in its tracks, and I think your Prime Minister has begun to do a good job on that, if I may say so. That security gets better, and that both the police and the judiciary and the legal systems see strong improvements, and that as prosperity increases, a virtuous circle starts to take shape, as it has in East Asia, of an emerging middle class that has quite a few less children than before, and so that the current demographic bulge, with a strong, educated, vibrant young population and a relatively small old age population, especially compared with ours in the West, provides that economic takeoff. On all these fronts, and I'm referring mainly to Kenya, but Kenya is something of a prototype, the picture is mixed. Much of the hope is based on promises of future delivery. The thrust for education is admirably obvious. Africans are becoming more innovative, and we have some admirable young innovators in our audience. And indeed, the population growth is, only slightly in Kenya and distinctly elsewhere in Africa, especially in the more successful countries, coming down steadily. The mobile phone revolution is indeed terrific, as I mentioned. I'm glad to see that Michael Joseph of Safaricom is here too. I think many Kenyans are delighted with what he and others have done to inspire the mobile phone revolution. The regulatory climate for investment is better, and there are many other improving aspects, I think, of the business climate. But there is also a gloomy scenario. Many Kenyans, I believe, still fear that this population explosion may bring more grief than joy. And there are many questions I'd like to pose, and I'm sure our panelists and ministers with us will give good answers in the course of the evening. For example, can the economy that is growing fast cope with such a huge population increase? Can the land feed the people, especially as climate change hits Africa as hard as anywhere and maybe harder? In parts of Kenya, including the Prime Minister's own area in the west, but in other places too, land is being divided and divided into unsustainable plots. Can that be stopped? Can that process be stopped? Can the surplus population move into those beautifully planned new towns that I mentioned? Is indeed urban planning really happening? Is the infrastructure improving fast enough to facilitate more trade and investment? I have to confess, I've just been on a 600-kilometer journey around the north and center, and I didn't see all that much evidence of it. Is crime and security under control? Are the police and the judiciary really being reformed? Has corruption really been tackled? Can we be confident that hordes of angry, unemployed young men like the Mungiki will not one day rebel violently against the old establishment, creating chaos and misery? I hope the answer to all these questions is yes. I'm not certain yet, but I'm now going to hand over to our distinguished guests and panelists to let them convince me otherwise. And first off, we are very lucky indeed to have the Prime Minister himself to set the agenda and give us his keynote speech. And thank you very much for coming here.